great to see you. Happy Sunday. Thanks for being here. There's about, everyone in the room, more people than I thought would be here on this snowy morning, which gives me, that's encouraging. It's great to see you. So I'm going to start this way. So your house is on fire. So we're going from bad to worse, but I think this will be fun. So your house is on fire. I was going to say everybody that you love is out, but then I thought, no, we better say all the people are out. So all the people in your house are out of the house. And so are your pets, and so are your plants, and so are your photos and your art and your important documents. Okay? So what I'm trying to get to is this. So you get to rescue one nostalgic, otherwise trivial, mostly unvaluable item. You know, like maybe something that's on a shelf somewhere, maybe something that's in the back of a drawer somewhere, maybe something from your childhood like your grandpa's money clip, or something as silly as like a hat that your grandma used to wear, or something from your childhood. You get to save one mostly trivial item, but to you like, okay, if I get to save one thing beyond my spouse or my roommates or my kids or my cat or my dog or my plants, I'm going to save that. So I want you to think about what that would be. And the disadvantage of being here, though, I think there's an advantage, is you guys at home, you can just hit pause and have this conversation. But you guys, I thought, man, what a fun conversation potentially this afternoon. Like, what's the thing that you'll save, which might lead to some need for marital counseling or something like that. But you got something? You don't even have to tell anybody because it might be embarrassing. For me, I was going to bring them. And I'm cheating a little bit, I think towards the top of the list, I don't know if it's the very top, but it comes with a good story, I have these 5 red Fredbird cardinal figurines. I know you'll be surprised it's associated with the Cardinals, but they're these little plastic or kind of rubber, it's from the era of, I'm about to date myself, remember the California raisins from Hardee's? It's from that same era, like when you had these little tiny plastic figurines. For those of you who are like, what are we talking about? Like before we had iPhones, we had things that we held in our hands and played with. That's cynical, but so I have these 5 of them, and the way I got them, it's like Fredbird holding a bat, and Fredbird pitching a ball, and Fredbird sliding into home plate, and I went on eBay, and of course, this is part of what the internet's done, is there's like you can have anything you want, anytime you want, from anywhere you want, but at the time, they were a treasure. So as a kid, we went to St. Louis 3 different summers, so I think it might have been 1988, I'm not entirely sure what year it was, but we would always, at one point in the trip, we'd always go downtown, and all the ladies wanted to go to this. I remember we just called it the Glass Mall. They all wanted to go shopping. My sister, I had an older sister. They wanted to go shopping at the Glass Mall. And so my dad and my uncle and I, we would hope upon hope that there was a Cardinal game going on, because at that time, you could just walk in for free during the 7th inning stretch. But on this day, there wasn't a Cardinal going on, so we were stumbling around this giant Glass Mall. And at one point, my dad and uncle, and at the time it didn't strike me as odd, but that we walked into this bar, which I was like, remember, that Missouri, this is the town that still doesn't have open container laws. So yes, in the mall, they also have the bar, right? Do they not have them? Is that still true, Susie? No open container laws? Yeah, see, so it's like Budweiser owns Missouri, I think. So we walk into this bar thing in this mall, and my dad and uncle must have been ordering a drink. And I just remember on the shelf behind the bar, there were these 5 Fredbird figurines. And I don't know if you remember, like part of the reason why vacation used to be fun was you could buy stuff that you couldn't get anywhere else, right? This is back to that internet thing. And I saw these 5 Fredbird figurines, and my grandpa would always give me a $20 bill before we left on these road trips, because we always drove there. We'd always go to A&W, and he would give us, my sister and I, each a $20 bill, and like that was the thing that you got to buy something with. And I was like, Dad, I want to buy those Cardinal figurines. And my dad asked the bartender, and he said, no, they're not for sale. And it's not like I fell on the ground and threw a fit. Like, I actually don't remember the conversation that ensued. But I do remember at one point the bartender saying to my dad, well, I'll trade you for your shirt. Because along the way, we'd stopped in the Black Hills, and we went to Mount Rushmore, and my dad had this Mount Rushmore shirt on that he had apparently purchased. This is all pretty blurry to me, but it was a cartoon drawing of Mount Rushmore. So it had the 4 heads. Who are they? I meant to look this up. Must be Lincoln, Washington, Teddy Roosevelt. Who's the 4th one? Jefferson. Okay, so in case you wondered about my patriotism, I don't know who's on Mount Rushmore. Anyway, so they had the 4 drawn figurehead Mount Rushmore heads, but then on the back of the shirt, I don't know if you've seen this before, maybe you have, it's slightly offensive, but it was a drawing. because the front of the shirt just looked like a drawing of Mount Rushmore. But you know, like when you go to the fair and you like stick your head through the hole of like the butterfly, and then they take your picture and it's actually your head on the butterfly or whatever it is? Well, the shirt was kind of doing that, because on the back of the shirt, it was the 4 presidents, again drawn, but completely naked, kind of leaning over the edge of the cliff, like their heads were just hanging over there, and you could see their butts and the back of their legs of Mount Rushmore. And the bartender was so taken by the novelty of that he said, hey, I'll trade you for your shirt for those 5 cardinal figurines. So I still remember being embarrassed because I'm shy that way. My dad just took his shirt off right in the bar, and then they gave him this Bud Light shirt that was like 2 sizes too small. And I got my cardinal figurines, and then they were in my room growing up. And then you know how your parents, maybe you're to this season of life, and if you're not, someday your mom's going to do this to you. You go visit over Christmas or something, and they produce these boxes. And they're like, either it's garbage or take it with you. You know, that thing? Well, it was in one of those boxes, and there are these 5 figurines. So they're in my home office now, but I forgot to bring one this morning. So what's your thing? I bring all that up because what I want to do this morning, and I communicated this in an email, but the area where I've found the most like kind of spiritual waypoints over the last few weeks is to return to this rather nostalgic thing from Christian tradition called the Lord's Prayer. And if we did a raise of hands, I'm not going to do that. Probably the majority of the room is familiar, especially if you were raised in like a Catholic or a Lutheran tradition. It was probably part of your liturgy. But it's crazy for me to think, and I think just worth pointing out, that like for over 2,000 years, like we go all the way back to the actual mouth of Jesus himself to find this tool, this device, this prayer that sometimes is called the Our Father. I think that's what I grew up calling it, or the Lord's Prayer. Depends on your tradition. But it's this prayer that's been prayed. And many of us, like liturgy is maybe not your thing, although that's kind of oxymoronic because liturgy is kind of relative. But I was talking to a friend this week or maybe it was last week, who comes from a Catholic and now Episcopalian tradition, and we were talking about liturgy, and he said, well, the liturgy can put you to sleep. That's the bad news. He said, but it can also carry you when nothing else is making sense. And it was, for me, really helpful to hear him talk about part of the value in his tradition, this especially Episcopal tradition of going to church, is that in seasons where belief is too hard for him personally, he gets to be in a context and be carried by the belief of those around him. That's what I want to do with the Lord's Prayer this morning, is just take a moment and go, in the midst of all of the crazy stuff, and for me, in conversations, like have you ever just feel like you're living Groundhog's Day? Because every conversation, I mean, you can guess the subject in advance. It's one of 2 things, right? And I do this as much as anybody. COVID, politics, COVID, the election, COVID, the election. Feels like that one might never go away. And for me, there's been this kind of grabbing the Lord's Prayer maybe provides this way of rescuing ourselves from that cycle. And you may recall, we did a series years ago. Dallas Willard, in his book, The Divine Conspiracy, does a remarkable job with the Lord's Prayer. But it was there that he introduced us to this different way of seeing the Lord's Prayer. Because I grew up Catholic. I think I said the Lord's Prayer almost every night before I went to bed, the Lord's Prayer and a Hail Mary. I did rosaries. I had some familiarity with it that way. But what I learned from Dallas Willard is there's this other way, which is really kind of a start and stop way. It's a way where, say, when your alarm goes off in the morning and you lay there in semi-consciousness and debate whether or not to hit snooze, in those 15 seconds before you either get out of bed or fall back asleep, it's a way to start your day. Just going, Our Father, which art in heaven. You can go to that slide, Jack. And again, there's a way of praying the Lord's Prayer that just powers through it, and I think there's value in that. But the way that I want to talk about this morning is there's this way of like returning intermittently to it throughout the day, like kind of making the goal being in every day from the time I wake up to the time I fall asleep, I want to have prayed through the 6 movements of the prayer, which means maybe when you wake up and you start praying, you start with this, Our Father, which art in heaven, which of course begs the question, where's heaven? A subject of great debate. And I can't study the original languages. I've not taken the time to learn that. I have the tools on my computer, but I can study people who do. And what they say is the word heaven here that Jesus used, that the gospel writer Matthew used, he had many options to pick from, and the one he picked was the one that refers to the space that ends at the top of your head. So while we would like to think that ancient peoples who didn't understand science with the same sophistication we do thought only of God as being way, way, way out there, heaven being somewhere up there, which now seems impossible because there's no, like that couldn't possibly be the way. It was like Jesus, way before his time, was going, our Father who is right here. Remember, this is the Jesus who said, repent. His first message, or the first thing Mark has him saying in his public ministry, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Jesus was one time asked by different people, hey, when will the kingdom come? Like, when will our guy be in office? And Jesus says, no, the kingdom's among you. It's right here. It's within your grasp. This is the Jesus who, when he was raising his friend Lazarus from the dead, this very tricky story in our culture, but this has always stood out to me. In John 10, when Jesus is finally about to raise Lazarus from the dead, it says this, so they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I've said this for the sake of the crowd standing here so that they may believe that you sent me. Oftentimes for us, prayer is this very black and white, here and there, but it's this reminder that for Jesus, I think we can justifiably call the original mystic. Like, for Jesus, God wasn't just a theological construct or idea. God was here, personal, the presence of God. And again, when we think about this prayer as a way of reframing our psyche and our consciousness throughout our day, what happens if we start by going, oh, okay, or what if a couple times a day we hit this like, our Father who is right here, right in my midst. Remember, this is the Jesus who says, the way Dallas Willard paraphrases Jesus is he says, for Jesus, the world was a perfectly safe place to be. Why? Because he had such a known awareness of the presence of God in his life. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Go ahead to that next one. Hallowed is not a word we use. But see, here's how this works for me. So I'm that guy who on a good day, in between snooze and getting out of bed or re-sleeping, I can start with that God right here. And then generally, if I'm lucky, I'm walking to work and I went, oh yeah, that must have lasted 10 seconds, and then I got out of bed or I fell asleep. And then you return to this idea, hallowed be thy name. What is hallowing? It's somewhat patronizing probably, because we have this sense that we don't know the word, that it speaks to aura, it speaks to attention, it speaks to like, God, may my life be about you. In fact, let's do this. Will someone up there, hey Jen, will you walk over to this spotlight right here? Do you mind? I'm putting you on the spot. But if you walk over here, and then Gabby, if you kill the lights. Jen, don't break your leg on the stairs, especially because I know what your husband does. Or I know what Dave does. So there's a red switch back there. Will you flip that thing on? Yeah, I made that difficult. Will you give her some house lights, Gabby? Yeah, okay. See the red switch? Okay, now flip that on. Now flip that off. Okay. Okay, now will you point that at, like, pick someone in the crowd and just pick on them. Like, find a bald head maybe and just... Right? This is Halloween, right? It's checking in periodically and going, God, my life flows towards something. May it flow towards your goodness. Think of what this election season taught us about the power of a name and the power of name association. It's this reminder that a name is important. And somehow in Jesus' psyche, the disciples said, hey, teach us to pray. And part of the second movement for Jesus was that my life would just radiate life. Dallas Willard calls this the angled mirrors. The angled mirror, reflecting to creation the glory of God, reflecting back to God the praises of creation. There's a music video I want to show you that for me captures just this, our life is headed somewhere. What's it pointing to? So we can flip off that, Jen. Thank you. And then we can go to that video, Jack. Thanks.
And I'll fall on my knees. Tell me how's the way to be. Tell me how's the way to go. Tell me all that I should know, and I'll fall on my knees. Tell me how's the way to go. Tell me how's the way to be, to evoke some empathy. Danger will follow me now everywhere I go. Angels will call on me and take me to my home. Well, this tired mind just wants to be let home. And I'll fall on my knees. Tell me how's the way to go. Tell me how's the way to see, and show me all that I could be. And I'll fall on my knees. Tell me how's the way to be, and tell me how's the way to go, and tell me why I feel so low. Danger will follow me now everywhere I go. Angels will call on me and take me to my home. Well, these tired eyes just want to remain closed. I don't see clearly, can't feel nothing. Oh, can you hear me? And I fall on my knees. Follow me now, lead me to my home.
I think for me, the imagery there that I find valuable is just that I think Halloween is this acknowledgement that our life goes somewhere, and there's not a path that doesn't involve fear, but it's this conscious, daily decision to return to the Halloween of God's name. And I think that our current circumstances, to me, make it just so crystal clear how important that piece is. So our Father who's right here, hallowed be your name, which I think is it's a statement of direction and purpose. Your kingdom come, your will be done Go ahead, Jack, to that one. On earth as it is in heaven, or as I learned it, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And this one messes with me. I mean, is this a prayer of action? As in this reminder that Jesus has dreams for the world and God's major way of working in the world is for us to lock hold of those dreams and join with him in making them happen? Is this a prayer of surrender? As in, not my will, but yours be done? I mean, I can't help but think, what would happen if, the last time you experienced some kind of paralyzing fear, or the last time you had your latest control freak outburst, like what happens if just emotionally we were stepping into this movement at least once a day? Your kingdom come, your will be done. And for me, one of the things this reminds me of is, I love the way David Brooks, who's this thinker that I'm really starting to appreciate what he's saying, one of the things he says is that 0.1% of our life involves making decisions. And 99.9% of our life involves following through with our decisions and doing so daily. And I think this is as true spiritually as anything. Maybe you're someone in the room, and I hope you are, who had this moment, and this moment where you chose to kind of turn things over to God. And generally that comes with crisis, whether that was an intellectual crisis or a physical crisis or a relational crisis. And maybe that happened in a moment. Maybe that kind of unfolded over a year or two. Like sometimes we can look back and go that point in time, and sometimes we go that season of life. But there's these decisions. And maybe you're here this morning because you're in the midst of one right now or contemplating one. And I think those are important, but I wonder if thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is this reminder that you don't just make that decision once, any more than you do in a marriage or when a kid is born or when you take a job. Like it's a perpetual thing. I had this experience on a run, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where I had this aha moment. It was just, for me, as I'm wrestling with COVID and life and church and all these different things, I had this breakthrough moment that was connected to a particular verse in James, actually. And that, for me, those are the moments. That's why I get up early. That's why I go for runs, because you hope to have those moments, and you're lucky if you get one once a month. But I had one of those, and I do the things I normally do. I kind of redirected my quiet times and morning study times and thinking towards this moment. And I was opening up Evernote, which is this online note-taking thing that I use and have used for years. And so I'm taking notes, and I'm using commentaries, and I'm copying and pasting stuff to my Evernote entry. And then if you are familiar with Evernote, one of the things that it does is it cross-references yourself for you. So if there's a word that you used in another note, it'll kind of bring that to the bottom of the page. And I generally don't pay attention to those because, I don't know, I just don't. But for whatever reason, that morning I looked down, and there was a note where I had referenced the exact same verse that I'd been studying, and was like, this is going to change my life forever. And then I clicked on the note, and first of all, I saw that I'd created the note in 2015. And then second, I saw that almost verbatim, the questions I was asking, the comments that commentators had made that I'd highlighted and copied to that, the verses that were just kind of bringing life to me, they were all there. And for a moment, there was this kind of self-hatred that stepped in. Like, seriously? 5 years ago, you made all these observations, you learned all these things? 5 years, and I think that's one way to look at it. But then the other way to look at it is, I think this reminder of what the Lord's Prayer is all about is that the bad news is we don't learn stuff quickly or permanently. The good news is it seems that that's what the Jesus tradition holds on to. I think I'm as guilty as anybody of emphasizing that the role of church is about learning new things. And I think in this season we're being reminded that that's the secondary role for most of us most of the time. That this is more about reminders. Remember the book of Deuteronomy over and over. Remember. In fact, I dare say the very reason why you even have the Bible, the oral tradition that set it up, and now the written tradition that we carry around, it's about remembering what we already knew and know. I wonder if thy kingdom come, thy will be done is this tool to where once, twice, 3 times a day we're just redoing the surrender thing. And what happens if we have a habit of every time we get in our car to drive home from work, we pick up in the Lord's Prayer and we pick up here and there's this like surrender. And then it moves into give us this day our daily bread, which I don't know about for you. For me, the asking part of prayer is the part that I like the least. It's the most confusing, it's the most exhausting, it's the most unclear. Like the part of prayer that's about self-awareness and becoming a kind of a Jesus-centered mindfulness, I'm all in on that. The part that says like, God, I'm going to bend and reshape your will, it's uncomfortable to me, but I have to acknowledge that Jesus teaches us to pray that way. And it seems like in this section it makes room for all of that. Give us this day, God, it's okay for me to acknowledge my needs. But I also wonder if there's a nuance here. Because remember, when Jesus, in his greatest chapter, or greatest message in my mind on worry, in Matthew 6, he does this long expose about why do you worry? Look at the lilies, look at the birds. Like, does God not take care of them? And you may or may not know that the second to last verse of that thought is this rather famous statement where Jesus says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all this stuff will be given to you as well. So I'm confused if I'm being honest. To what extent is give us this day our daily bread about acknowledging stuff that we actually need, especially physical stuff that maybe we often take for granted? And to what extent is it like, Lord, I know that your commitment to me is that if I focus on you and others and your initiatives, your agendas, then you take care of me. I just had a conversation with one of my boys this week, and it's a terribly uncomfortable conversation for me, because there's like what I want to be true and what's been true in my life. And I was just explaining to him, like, here's been my experience, and I know this sounds like superstition, but it's just been my experience. Like when I'm financially, especially prioritizing, like the classic tithe conversation, the giving conversation, like I was taught this early by my friend Fred, like I just find that when I'm setting aside part of my resource for God, when I'm being faithful and consistent in that, my car just breaks down less. And there's part of me that doesn't like that because it kind of sounds like Christian superstition. But then there's part of me that's like, man, this is no longer like a short study for me. I'm 20 years into this. I wonder if that is, or I had a conversation with a friend recently, and he was kind of candidly sharing what he makes an hour, but then was also sharing how he has this very intentional practice of setting aside some lunches and some different times in his day, and then sometimes in his evenings, and he's just aware, as many of you I'm sure are, that like when in those seasons, what he's doing is just pouring into people relationally and being available and talking kingdom stuff with the particular population that he serves. And he's aware that when he's having lunch with this person, he could be making this much in that hour. And it was a real similar conversation, he said, though, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was more or less, but I just find that like God's provision for me is greater than the math, is the way I'm going to say it. Give us this day our daily bread. I wonder if it's as much about God, give me what I need, as it is this, oh yeah, the kingdom story was one where somehow God says, you focus on others and my places and my priorities, and I'll meet your needs. And forgive us our debts. So do you see how what I'm trying to portray here is for me when I do this well, this happens throughout the day, like, because then I get distracted 20 seconds in, and then I remember when I'm walking home. And I think this comes back to the cell phone thing of if we just don't allow our phones and screens to take away all our interludes, if we actually get bored sometimes, maybe we'll go, oh, I'm not going to in the middle of the night put a podcast in, though I do that sometimes too. I'm just going to work through the Lord's Prayer. And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. It just makes sense, wouldn't it, that Jesus would have a section of this that's about, I almost did a message on this in the last series, but chickened out. Just, Jesus was really difficult to offend. Like, Jesus seemed to live from this place of be difficult to offend and keep short accounts. Like, be very self-aware of when you've offended or when you've taken offense, and deal with those quickly. That the God who calls us to confess our stuff to him is also asking us interrelationally to be hyper aware. And I would just guess that if once or twice or 3 times a day you're praying this section, there would be some internal accountability of like, oh yeah, I better circle back with them. And then there's this 6th movement, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Go ahead, Jack, to that last one. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And this is the one that I get to the least, if I'm being honest. It's the one I understand the least. I'm trusting Dallas Willard. His best shot at this is to say that this is about acknowledging to God that we have clay feet, that we're weak, that we can't withstand as much temptation as we might think. It's a way of saying, God, please protect me. Please protect me from my own self-sabotage. I don't know if you have this experience. I'm sure most of us do, but part of the reason why I don't even like looking at the newspaper is because, especially on a local level, almost everything that shows up in the headlines, most of which is tragic and involves sin and brokenness and evil, rarely do I open that on my computer and see a front page headline and go, oh, I could never do that. I used to work with a guy who used to make a way of saying to high school students, he made a way of saying to them constantly, he would say, every one of us is just one or two decisions away from the gutter. I think what Jesus is getting us to pray here is, God, I'm not nearly as strong as I think. So please, do everything that you can do to minimize how much like self-control I have to exercise in this broken, tempting world. And if you follow Christian subculture, we've had, it seems like an endless reminder of that yet again, of Christian celebrities, most recently Rabbi Zacharias, who is just like, seriously, what is this? Deliver us from evil, because we're prone to this. What would happen? And I think this is the advantage of this season that we're in, is it's, as Seth Godin says, it's a season of redefining what the finish line really is. It's a season of refiguring out what really matters. What would happen if in your spiritual life you worked your way through this once a day? And how might that not just impact you, but then the concentric circles that go out from you as you walk into class, as you get to the team, as you get to the game, as you get to work, as you walk in the door at the end of the day, as you greet your 2-year-old first thing in the morning? I think it's N.T. Wright who I heard say, take away the entire Bible and leave me the Lord's Prayer, and I've got enough to go on. And I wonder if a church that kind of prides itself on what's new and creative and not traditional does well to recognize that for over 2,000 years, Christ's followers have kind of anchored themselves to this very simple but very profound prayer. Listen, if you're here this morning because you're looking for more than what Sunday normally would give you, Tommy's going to talk at the end. Like, if you want to meet with the staff, would love to do that. Chances are you're with somebody you know. Would love to see you open up with them. But let's just let one another know if we can do something. Let me pray. God, thanks for the Lord's Prayer. And it seems obvious that your experience of prayer was unique enough that some young people in your life who grew up in a culture of prayer, and especially liturgical prayer, thought that they needed to ask you what you do because you do it differently. And God, we see within you patterns that aren't really that much different than our own lives. You ate a lot of meals, you walked a lot of places, you had lots of kind of interlude time between activities, and you at times got alone by yourself. It seems you had a pretty good pattern of that. So Lord, as we step into what seems like it's probably going to be a long run yet with COVID, my prayer would be that we would be beacons of hope and optimism and joy, not because our circumstances maybe are any different than those around us, but because we're doing the internal work with you and one another. Amen.
If you would like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us at narratechurch.org or look us up on Facebook and Instagram.